The woman stepped off the stagecoach into the bitter January wind of Shafter, Texas, her thin coat doing nothing to shield her from the cold that cut through to her bones. And as her eyes scanned the empty street for the man who had promised to marry her, she felt the first tear freeze on her cheek before it could fall. Theresa Montgomery clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as the stagecoach driver tossed down her trunk with a thud that echoed through the quiet Main Street. The year was 1883, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man named Walter Hughes, a rancher who had written her letters full of promises about a life of comfort and companionship in the West. Those letters, tied with a frayed ribbon in her bag, had been her only comfort during the long journey. Now, standing in this desolate mining town near the Mexican border, with the wind howling through the buildings and not a soul in sight, those promises felt as empty as the street before her. "This is the address you gave me, miss," the driver said, pointing to a saloon across the way. "Hughes Ranch is about 5 miles north of town. You might ask in there for directions or wait for someone to come fetch you." Theresa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The driver climbed back onto his seat, and within moments, the stagecoach was pulling away, leaving her alone with her luggage and her growing sense of dread. She had written to Walter 2 weeks before her departure, giving him the exact date and time of her arrival. He should have been here. He had promised to be here. She forced herself to walk toward the saloon, dragging her trunk behind her. The sound of it scraping across the frozen ground seemed impossibly loud. When she pushed open the door, a wave of warmth hit her face, along with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. Several men looked up from their card games and drinks, their eyes settling on her with varying degrees of curiosity and something else she did not want to name. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I am looking for Walter Hughes. I was supposed to meet him here today." The bartender, a heavy man with a stained apron, exchanged a glance with one of the patrons. Something passed between them, something that made Theresa's stomach clench with fear. "You must be the mail-order bride," a man at the bar said. He was older, with gray in his beard and kind eyes that looked at her with what might have been pity. "Miss, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Walter Hughes died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick." The room spun. Theresa reached out blindly for something to steady herself and found the back of a chair. Dead. Walter was dead. She had left everything behind, had spent her last dollar on the journey here, and the man she was supposed to marry was dead. "Does she know anyone else in town?" Another voice asked, but it sounded far away as if coming through water. "Got any family to wire?" the bartender asked. Theresa shook her head. Her parents had died in a tenement fire 2 years ago. She had been working as a seamstress, barely making enough to afford a room in a boarding house, when she had seen Walter's advertisement seeking a bride. He had seemed respectable in his letters, educated, kind. He had been her way out of poverty and loneliness. Now he was gone and she had nothing. "I have a little money," she said, though her voice shook. "Perhaps I could find work. Is there a boarding house?" The men exchanged more glances. "Mrs. Patterson runs a place, but times are hard here, miss. The silver mines are not producing like they used to. Most families do their own sewing and washing. There is not much call for extra hands." "I will find something," Theresa said, though she did not believe her own words. "Could someone please direct me to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house?" "I will take you," said a younger man who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He stood, and Theresa saw he was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that were a striking shade of blue. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim and a sheepskin coat, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made her instinctively trust him more than the others in the room. "Name is Owen Keller. I have a ranch outside town and I come in for supplies. Mrs. Patterson's place is on my way." "Thank you," Theresa managed, though more tears were threatening to fall. She would not cry in front of these strangers. She would not. Owen picked up her trunk with ease and gestured for her to follow. Outside, he loaded her belongings into a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentle hand on her elbow, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode in silence for several minutes. The wind had picked up, and Theresa pulled her coat tighter, but it did little good. She had not expected Texas to be so cold. In her imagination, fed by Walter's letters, the West had been a place of endless sunshine and warm days. No one had warned her about winter in the high desert. "I am sorry about Hughes," Owen said finally. "That is a hard thing to travel so far for." "Did you know him?" Theresa asked. "Not well. He kept to himself mostly. His ranch adjoins mine on the eastern border." Owen paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I heard he was not doing well financially. The drought last year hit him hard. Another blow. Even if Walter had lived, the life he had promised might have been a lie." Theresa felt the tears she had been holding back begin to fall, hot against her cold cheeks. She turned her face away, not wanting this stranger to see her cry, but Owen said nothing, simply kept the horses moving steadily through the frozen streets. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a two-story wooden structure that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the siding, and several shutters hung crooked. Owen helped Theresa down and carried her trunk to the door. An older woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun answered his knock. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Theresa Montgomery. She just arrived from back east and needs a room." Mrs. Patterson looked Theresa up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You are the one coming to marry Walter Hughes?" "Yes, madam, though I just learned he has passed." "That is unfortunate. Room is $2 a week, paid in advance. Breakfast is included, but you are on your own for other meals." Theresa reached into her reticule with shaking hands and counted out the bills. She had enough for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she was very careful. After that, she did not know what she would do. Mrs. Patterson took the money and handed her a key. "Third door on the left upstairs. Supper is at 6 if you want to pay extra for it. 25 cents. "Thank you," Theresa whispered. Owen carried her trunk upstairs and set it inside the small room. It was clean but sparse, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. A window looked out over the main street. When Owen turned to leave, Theresa found herself saying, "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Keller. I will not forget it." He nodded, his blue eyes gentle. "If you need anything, the Keller Ranch is 5 miles northwest of town. Anyone can give you directions." Then he was gone, and Theresa was alone. She closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry in earnest. Great, racking sobs tore through her chest as the full weight of her situation crashed down. She was alone in a strange place, with no family, no prospects, and almost no money. The man she had come to marry was dead and buried. She had nothing. That night she cried herself to sleep, and when she woke in the morning to frost on the inside of the window, she cried again. The days began to blur together. She tried to find work, going from business to business in town, but there was nothing. The general store did not need help. The hotel had a full staff. Even the saloon, which might have hired her to serve drinks, had no openings. The town was dying slowly, choking on the failing mines and the harsh winter. Theresa began to ration her food, eating only 1 meal a day to make her money last. She grew thinner, her face hollow, her eyes red-rimmed from constant tears. At night, she would lie in her narrow bed and wonder if she should have stayed in Philadelphia. At least there she had known the streets, had known where to find day work. Here she was utterly lost. February brought even colder weather. Snow fell in the mountains visible to the north, and the wind that swept down from them turned Shafter into a frozen wasteland. Theresa's thin coat and worn boots were no match for the cold. She spent most of her time in her room, huddled under the thin blanket, trying to stay warm. One morning in mid-February, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, Mrs. Patterson stood in the hallway with a stern expression. "Your rent is due," the landlady said. "Yes, madam, I have it." Theresa counted out the last of her money with trembling fingers. After this, she had 37 cents left to her name. Mrs. Patterson took the bills and studied Theresa's face. "You are not eating enough. You will make yourself sick." "I am fine," Theresa lied. "I have seen women in your situation before," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice softer than usual. "Pride will not keep you alive. If you need help, you had better ask for it before you end up in the ground like Walter Hughes." After the landlady left, Theresa sat on her bed and stared at the coins in her hand. 37 cents. In a week, she would be homeless. She had no idea what she would do then. The thought of throwing herself on the charity of strangers made her sick with shame, but the alternative was freezing to death on the streets. She was still sitting there, paralyzed by fear and despair, when another knock came at her door. When she opened it this time, Owen Keller stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "Miss Montgomery," he said, "I hope I am not intruding. Mrs. Patterson said you were in." "Mr. Keller," Theresa said, surprised. She had not seen him since the day he had brought her to the boarding house. "Please, come in." He stepped into the small room, and suddenly it felt even smaller. He was a big man, and he seemed to fill the space with his presence. He looked around, his eyes taking in the sparse furnishings and the worn carpet bag in the corner, and something shifted in his expression. "I came to town for supplies and thought I would check on how you are managing," he said. The kindness in his voice was too much. Theresa felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, and she turned away, pressing her hands to her face. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I do not mean to cry. It seems I cannot stop these days." "Miss Montgomery," Owen said gently, "are you eating properly?" She could not answer, could not force the lie past her lips. The silence stretched between them, and then Owen said quietly, "When was the last time you had a meal?" "Yesterday morning," she whispered. "I had some bread." She heard him exhale a long, slow breath. "Get your coat," he said. "We are going to the hotel restaurant." "I cannot accept your charity," Theresa said, though her stomach ached with hunger at the thought of food. "It is not charity. Consider it a business proposition. I need to talk to you about something, and we can do it over a meal." She did not believe him, but she was too hungry and too desperate to refuse. She put on her thin coat and followed him downstairs and across the street to the hotel. The restaurant was warm and smelled of coffee and frying meat. Owen led her to a table by the window and held out her chair. When the waitress came, he ordered roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and coffee for both of them. "I cannot pay you back," Theresa said quietly when the waitress left. "I am not asking you to," Owen replied. He leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "Miss Montgomery, I am going to be direct with you because I think you are in a situation that requires directness. You are alone in a town with no prospects, and by my guess, you have almost no money left." "Am I right?" Theresa nodded, shame burning in her chest. "I have a proposition for you," Owen said. "I need a housekeeper at my ranch, someone to cook and clean and help with the household management. The woman who used to do it, Mrs. Garcia, had to move to El Paso to care for her sick daughter. I can offer you room and board plus $20 a month. It is honest work and you would be safe." Theresa stared at him. "Why would you offer this to me? You do not know me." "I know you came here hoping for a better life and got dealt a bad hand through no fault of your own," Owen said. "I know you are too proud to ask for help even when you are starving. And I know I have a house that is falling apart because I cannot cook or clean worth a damn. And I have cowhands who are about ready to mutiny because they are tired of eating burned beans and sleeping in a bunkhouse that has not been properly cleaned in months." The waitress brought their food and Theresa looked down at the plate in front of her. The roast beef was thick and tender, the potatoes were covered in rich gravy, and the vegetables were steaming hot. Her stomach cramped with need, but she forced herself to look up at Owen. "This is real?" she asked. "You truly need help." "I truly do," he said. "And I think you need this too, so let us help each other." Theresa picked up her fork with shaking hands and took a small bite of potato. The taste exploded on her tongue, warm and savory and perfect. She took another bite, and another, forcing herself to eat slowly even though she wanted to devour the entire plate. Across from her, Owen ate his own meal and did not stare, giving her the dignity of privacy in her hunger. When they were both finished, Owen ordered pie and more coffee. "If you agree," he said, "you can come out to the ranch tomorrow. I will send a wagon for you in the morning." "What will people say?" Theresa asked. "A single woman living on a ranch with a single man." "My mother lives with me," Owen said. "She had a stroke last year and cannot manage the household like she used to, but she is a good woman, and she will be a proper chaperone. There is also my younger brother, Nathaniel. He is 17 and helps with the ranch work, and we have 4 cowhands who live in the bunkhouse. You will not be alone with me if that is what worries you." It did worry her, but less than the prospect of being homeless. Theresa looked out the window at the frozen street, at the gray sky that promised more cold ahead, and made her decision. "Yes," she said, "I will come work for you." Relief crossed Owen's face, and for the first time he smiled. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Good. That is good. I will have the wagon here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." That night, Theresa packed her few belongings with hands that shook, not from cold but from a tentative hope. Perhaps this would be all right. Perhaps she had finally caught a break in her string of bad luck. She fell asleep without crying for the first time since arriving in Texas. True to his word, Owen arrived with a wagon the next morning. He paid Mrs. Patterson for the week Theresa would not be staying, despite her protests, and then helped her load her trunk. As they rode out of town toward the northwest, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and Theresa allowed herself to believe it might be an omen of better things to come. The Keller ranch was larger than she had expected. A 2-story stone house stood at the center, with a barn, stables, and bunkhouse arranged around it. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the winter-brown grass. Owen helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The house was warm but showed clear signs of neglect. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the floors had not been swept in what looked like weeks. But the furniture was solid and well made, and the windows were large, letting in plenty of light. "Mother is resting upstairs," Owen said. "She tires easily these days. I will introduce you later. Let me show you to your room." He led her upstairs to a small but comfortable bedroom at the end of the hall. It had a real bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, and a braided rug on the floor. It was the nicest room Theresa had slept in since leaving Philadelphia. "Take some time to settle in," Owen said. "When you are ready, come down to the kitchen and I will show you where everything is." After he left, Theresa sat on the bed and let out a long breath. The mattress was soft, the quilt was clean, and the room smelled faintly of lavender. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The tears that came now were different, born of relief rather than despair. She let herself cry for a few minutes, then washed her face in the basin and went downstairs to begin her new life. The kitchen was a disaster. Theresa rolled up her sleeves and started with the dishes, heating water on the stove and scrubbing away layers of grime. She found supplies in the pantry, enough flour and beans and preserved vegetables to make a decent meal. By the time Owen came in from the afternoon chores, she had chicken stew bubbling on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the counter. He stopped in the doorway and stared. "That smells incredible." "It is just stew," Theresa said, but she felt a warm glow of pride. "It is the best thing that has been in this kitchen in months," Owen said. He went to the stove and inhaled deeply. "Miss Montgomery, I think this is going to work out just fine." That evening, Theresa met Owen's mother, Margaret Keller, a tiny woman with white hair and one side of her face that drooped from the stroke. Her speech was slow and slightly slurred, but her mind was sharp, and her eyes were kind as she looked Theresa over. "Good to have another woman in the house," Margaret said. "These men, they try, but they do not know how to make a home comfortable." Theresa also met Nathaniel, a gangly boy with Owen's dark hair and a shy smile, and the 4 cowhands who lived in the bunkhouse. They were all polite and clearly delighted by the prospect of decent meals. That first dinner at the long table in the dining room was loud and cheerful, with the men praising her cooking and asking about life back east. After the meal, Theresa cleaned up the kitchen and then retreated to her room, exhausted but content. She wrote a letter to her friend Mary, who still lived in Philadelphia, telling her about the journey and the strange turn of events that had brought her to the Keller ranch. She did not mention how much she had cried, or how close she had come to complete destitution. Instead, she wrote about the beauty of the western landscape, the kindness of the Keller family, and her hope that this new position would work out well. As February turned to March, Theresa settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for the men, then spent her days cleaning, mending, and preparing meals. Margaret kept her company in the afternoons, teaching her how to make sourdough starter from scratch and sharing stories about the early days of the ranch. Nathaniel would sometimes sit at the kitchen table doing his lessons while Theresa worked, asking her questions about geography and history, subjects she had studied well during her school years. And Owen was always there, a steady presence in the house. He would come in from the cold each evening, his face reddened by wind, and hang his hat on the peg by the door. He would wash up at the pump outside, then join the family for dinner. He was a quiet man, not given to unnecessary words, but when he spoke, people listened. Theresa found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his hands moved when he talked, the rare smiles that lit up his face, the gentleness with which he treated his mother. But she still cried at night, lying in her comfortable bed with the quilt pulled up to her chin. She cried for the life she had expected with Walter Hughes, for the home and family that would never be. She cried for her parents, buried in pauper graves back east. She cried for the loneliness that haunted her even here, surrounded by kind people. The tears came unbidden, a nightly ritual she could not seem to break. One night in late March, she was in the kitchen preparing dough for the next morning's bread when Owen came in for a glass of water. He stopped when he saw her face, and she realized too late that her cheeks were wet with tears. "Miss Montgomery," he said gently, "are you all right?" She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour across her cheek. "I am fine, just tired." Owen crossed the kitchen and stood on the other side of the work table. "You cry every night," he said quietly. I've heard you through the walls." Theresa felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I am sorry. I did not mean to disturb you." "You are not disturbing me. I am worried about you." He paused, then said, "I know you came here expecting one life and got handed something very different. That is enough to make anyone grieve. But I want you to know that you have a place here. You are not just a housekeeper to us. You are part of this family now." The kindness in his voice made her tears flow harder. "I do not know why I cannot stop crying," she confessed. "During the day, I am fine. I am busy and useful and even happy sometimes. But at night, all the sadness comes back and I cannot help it." Owen walked around the table and, after a moment's hesitation, put a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was brief and proper, but the warmth of it seeped through her dress. "Grief has its own timeline," he said. "My father died 5 years ago, and for a long time after I would wake up in the middle of the night convinced I could hear his voice. You cannot rush healing." "How did you stop being sad?" Theresa asked. "I did not stop being sad," Owen said. "But eventually the happy moments started to outnumber the sad ones. That is all you can hope for. Time and good company." He smiled slightly. "And maybe some faith that joy lies ahead, even when you cannot see it yet." After he left, Theresa stood in the kitchen for a long time, her hands resting on the cool dough. Owen's words had planted something in her chest, a tiny seed of hope. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the grief would ease with time. Perhaps there was joy ahead. April brought warmer weather and the first wildflowers blooming across the prairie. Theresa threw open the windows to air out the house and planted a vegetable garden behind the kitchen. Margaret supervised from a chair in the shade, offering advice about what grew well in the Texas soil. Nathaniel helped dig the rows, and Owen brought home seedlings from a trip to town. Theresa found herself smiling more often. She would catch herself humming while she worked, or laughing at something Nathaniel said, and it would surprise her. The nights were still hard, but the crying spells grew shorter and less frequent. Some nights, she would fall asleep thinking about the next day, about the bread she would bake or the mending she needed to finish, and there would be no tears at all. She also found herself more aware of Owen. The way he would bring her wildflowers when he rode the range, leaving them on the kitchen windowsill without a word. The way he insisted she take Sunday afternoons off to rest, even though she protested she did not need it. The way his eyes would find her across the dinner table, a question in them she did not yet know how to answer. One Saturday in late April, Owen asked if she would like to ride out with him to see the cattle in the far pasture. Theresa had not been on a horse since she was a child, but she agreed. He saddled a gentle mare for her and helped her mount, his hands steady on her waist. They rode out across the grassland, the sky a brilliant blue overhead, and Theresa felt a freedom she had not experienced in years. "This land, it gets into your blood," Owen said as they paused on a rise overlooking the valley. "I have been to cities back east, but I always come back here. There is something about the space, the quiet. A man can breathe out here." "A woman too," Theresa said. She had thought she would miss the crowded streets of Philadelphia, the noise and bustle, but she found she did not. Here there was room to think, to heal. "You still cry at night?" Owen asked, his eyes on the horizon. Theresa considered lying, but something about the openness of the landscape made her want to be honest. "Sometimes, not as often." "That is good." He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. "I hope you are finding some happiness here, Theresa. You deserve it." It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the wind. "I am," she said quietly. "More than I expected." They rode back to the house in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Theresa felt it like a change in the weather, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had come to Texas for one man and lost him before they ever met. But perhaps fate had other plans. May brought longer days and harder work as the ranch shifted into full spring activity. There were cattle to move to summer pastures, fences to mend, calves to brand. Owen and the cowhands would leave before dawn and not return until after dark, exhausted and covered in dust. Theresa made sure there were hot meals waiting, along with clean clothes and a house that felt like a refuge from the hard labor. Margaret grew stronger as the weather warmed. She could walk short distances now with a cane, and her speech had improved considerably. She spent hours with Theresa in the kitchen, teaching her family recipes and sharing stories about Owen's childhood. Theresa learned that Owen had taken over the ranch at 21 when his father died suddenly of a heart attack. He had worked himself nearly to death that first year, trying to keep the operation running while caring for his grieving mother and teenage brother. He had never married because he had never had time to court anyone, had never met a woman he wanted to build a life with. "Until now," Margaret said one afternoon, giving Theresa a meaningful look. Theresa felt her face heat. "I do not know what you mean." "Child, I may have had a stroke, but I still have eyes," Margaret said. "My son looks at you the way his father used to look at me. And unless I am very much mistaken, you look at him the same way." "It would not be proper," Theresa said, though her heart was racing. "I am his employee." "You are a woman who has been through hard times and come out strong," Margaret said firmly. "And my son is a good man who deserves someone who can see that. What is proper is what makes people happy, not what some society matron back east says should happen." That night, Theresa lay in bed and thought about Margaret's words. When had her feelings for Owen changed from gratitude to something deeper? She could not pinpoint a single moment. It had been gradual, like the change from winter to spring. The way he made her feel safe. The way he listened when she talked, really listened as if her words mattered. The way he had promised her joy ahead and then, without even realizing it, had started to deliver on that promise. She did cry that night, but they were different tears. Tears of confusion and hope and fear all mixed together. What if she was misreading his kindness? What if he saw her only as a housekeeper, nothing more? The thought of making a fool of herself, of ruining this comfortable life she had built, terrified her. The next morning, Owen asked her to take a walk with him after breakfast. They strolled through the garden she had planted, admiring the neat rows of vegetables that were already starting to sprout. He was quiet, his hands clasped behind his back, and Theresa sensed he had something on his mind. "Theresa," he said finally, "I want to talk to you about something, and I hope you will hear me out before you answer." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Of course." He stopped walking and turned to face her. The morning sun lit his face, and she could see the nervousness in his eyes. "When you first came here, you were grieving and lost, and I offered you work because you needed it and I needed help. But over these past months, you have become so much more than a housekeeper to this family, to me." He took a breath. "I have come to care for you deeply. More than I probably should, given the circumstances, and I wondered if you might feel the same." Theresa stared at him, her mind racing. This strong, kind man was standing before her, his heart in his hands, waiting for her answer. All the nights of crying, all the grief and loss, suddenly seemed like a path that had led her here to this moment, to this man. "I do," she whispered. "I have tried not to, but I do." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise. "Then maybe we could start courting properly. I know it is soon, and I do not want to rush you, but I would like the chance to show you that there can be joy ahead. Real, lasting joy." "I would like that," Theresa said, and she realized she was crying again, but these were tears of happiness. Owen reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "I promise you," he said softly. "I am going to do everything in my power to make sure these are the last sad tears you cry." Over the next few months, Owen courted Theresa with a patience and tenderness that made her fall deeper in love with him. He would bring her flowers from the prairie, not just leaving them on the windowsill now, but presenting them to her directly with a shy smile. He would saddle horses on Sunday afternoons so they could ride together, showing her every corner of the ranch land, sharing his dreams for expanding the herd and building a legacy. They would sit on the porch in the evenings after the work was done, talking about everything and nothing while Margaret and Nathaniel smiled knowingly from inside. Theresa still had moments of sadness, times when the grief of what she had lost would wash over her unexpectedly. But Owen was always there, steady and patient. He would hold her hand and let her cry if she needed to, never making her feel weak or foolish. And gradually, just as he had promised, the happy moments began to outnumber the sad ones. In June, Owen asked her to marry him. They were by the creek that ran through the eastern pasture, sitting on a fallen log with their boots dangling over the water. He had packed a picnic lunch, and they had spent the afternoon talking and laughing. When he pulled the ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, Theresa's answer was immediate and certain. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in August in a small ceremony at the ranch. The circuit preacher came through town and performed the service in the parlor, with Margaret and Nathaniel as witnesses. Theresa wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric Owen had bought in town, a soft blue that matched the Texas sky. She had no family to stand with her, but the Kellers had become her family, and that was enough. When Owen slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her for the first time as her husband, Theresa felt the last piece of her broken heart click back into place. This was not the life she had planned when she left Philadelphia. It was better. It was real and earned and built on something solid. That night, lying in Owen's arms in the bedroom that was now theirs, Theresa thought about the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in January, frozen and terrified and alone. That woman had cried all through the winter, convinced her life was over. But she had been wrong. Her life was just beginning. "Are you happy?" Owen asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "So happy," Theresa said. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Good," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The following years proved Owen true to his word. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Theresa's father, was born in May of 1884. He was a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Theresa had been terrified during the pregnancy, afraid something would go wrong, but Margaret and Owen had been with her through every moment of the labor, and when she held her son for the first time, she wept with joy. "You are crying again," Owen teased gently, but there were tears in his own eyes as he looked at his wife and newborn son. "These are happy tears," Theresa said. "Only happy tears from now on." Thomas was followed by a daughter, Emma, in 1886, and another son, James, in 1888. The house that had once been dusty and neglected became filled with the sounds of children laughing and running through the halls. Theresa threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had once applied to survival. She was a patient, loving mother who read to her children every night and taught them to be kind and honest and hardworking. The ranch prospered under Owen's management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a reputation for raising quality cattle. Nathaniel grew into a capable young man and became Owen's partner in running the operation. When he turned 21, Owen deeded him a portion of the land to start his own herd, and Nathaniel built a house on the far side of the property. He married a schoolteacher from town, a practical woman named Sarah, and they had children of their own who played with Theresa and Owen's kids on Sundays. Margaret lived to see all of her grandchildren, recovering much of her strength and independence over the years. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1892, at the age of 68. The whole family grieved, but they took comfort in knowing she had lived to see Owen happy and settled, surrounded by the family she had always wanted for him. As the years passed, Theresa sometimes thought about that cold January day when she had arrived in Shafter with nothing but a thin coat and a broken dream. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. In many ways, it had. That frightened, crying woman had been transformed by hardship and love into someone stronger, someone capable of building a life from nothing but determination and hope. Owen kept his promise about the tears. There were still sad moments, of course. Life on a ranch was hard, with droughts and harsh winters and sick cattle and all the challenges that came with working the land. But through it all, Owen was there, steady and loving, ready to dry her tears and remind her that they would get through it together. And they always did. On their 10th anniversary in August of 1893, Owen surprised Theresa with a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time she had been away from the ranch for more than a day since arriving in Texas, and the first time they had been alone together without children in years. They stayed in a real hotel with a restaurant downstairs and spent 3 days exploring the city, eating in fancy restaurants and talking about their dreams for the future. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked one evening as they walked along the river. "Coming west, I mean." "All the hardship you went through?" Theresa thought about it seriously before answering. "No," she said finally, "because all of it, even the worst parts, led me to you, to this life. I would not change any of it." Owen pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I think about what my life would be like if you had not come to Shafter that day, and I cannot imagine it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa Keller." "You promised me joy," Theresa said, smiling up at him. "You have given me so much more than that." By 1895, Thomas was 11 and already helping with ranch work. Emma was 9 and showing a talent for drawing, and James was 7 and full of questions about everything. The house was always noisy and busy, filled with the chaos of family life. Theresa loved every minute of it. The woman who had once cried herself to sleep every night now fell asleep, each evening exhausted but content, with Owen's arm around her and the sounds of her children sleeping down the hall. One afternoon in late summer, Theresa was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see a well-dressed man on a fine horse, clearly not from around Shafter. He asked directions to the house, and she led him there, curious about who might be visiting. Owen came out of the barn when he heard voices. "Can I help you?" he asked the stranger. "I am looking for Mrs. Theresa Keller," the man said. "I am Jonathan Pierce, an attorney from Philadelphia. I have been trying to locate her for several months." Theresa felt a chill run through her despite the heat. "I am Theresa Keller." The attorney dismounted and pulled papers from his saddlebag. "Mrs. Keller, I have news regarding your late father's brother, Marcus Montgomery. He passed away 6 months ago and left a considerable estate. You are his sole surviving relative and heir." Theresa stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "I did not know my father had a brother." "They were estranged for many years," Mr. Pierce explained. "But before his death, Mr. Montgomery hired me to locate his brother's family. I am sorry to say I found the records of your parents' deaths in the tenement fire, but I have been searching for you ever since. It took considerable effort to trace you from Philadelphia to Texas." "What kind of estate?" Owen asked, his arm coming protectively around Theresa's waist. "Considerable," Mr. Pierce repeated. "Mr. Montgomery was a successful merchant. The estate is worth approximately $50,000. The number was so large it did not seem real. Theresa felt her knees weaken, and Owen held her steady. $50,000. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, more money than most people saw in a lifetime. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Sign some papers, which I have brought with me. The money has been held in trust pending your location. Once the paperwork is complete, it can be transferred to a bank of your choosing." They invited Mr. Pierce inside and spent the next several hours going through documents. He explained that her uncle had been a childless widower who had regretted his estrangement from his only brother. When he learned of the fire that killed Theresa's parents, he had been devastated that he had never reconciled with them. Finding Theresa and leaving her his fortune was his way of trying to make amends. After Mr. Pierce left the next morning with the signed papers, Theresa and Owen sat at the kitchen table, trying to process what had happened. $50,000, Theresa said, still unable to believe it. "Owen, you realize what this means? We could expand the ranch, buy more land, build a new house." "We could," Owen agreed. "Or we could save it for the children's educations. Send them to good schools back east if they want to go." "We could do both," Theresa said, her mind spinning with possibilities. "We could do so much." But as the initial shock wore off, Theresa found herself thinking about what this money represented. It was her uncle's attempt to make up for lost time, for relationships he had let slip away. It was a reminder of how fragile life was, how important it was not to waste time on regret or estrangement. "Owen," she said slowly, "I want to use some of this money to help other women like me, women who come west hoping for a better life and get dealt a bad hand. What if we set up a fund in town, something to help women in need, to give them a place to stay and help them find work?" Owen looked at her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "That is exactly the kind of thing you would think of," he said, "and I think it is a wonderful idea." Over the next few months, they worked with the town council to establish the Montgomery Women's Fund. They bought a building in Shafter and converted it into a boarding house for women in need, with a manager hired to help residents find employment and get back on their feet. Theresa donated a third of her inheritance to the fund, ensuring it would be able to help women for years to come. The rest of the money they used to expand the ranch and secure their children's futures. They built a new barn and bought breeding stock that would improve their herd. They put money aside for each child's education, wanting to ensure they had opportunities Theresa had never had. And they made some improvements to the house, adding a proper library where Theresa could keep her growing collection of books, and a large dining room where they could host holiday gatherings for the extended family. But the most important thing the money gave them was security. The constant worry about whether the ranch would make it through a bad year, whether they would have enough to feed their family and pay their hands, lifted. They could breathe easier, make plans without fear, dream bigger dreams. On Christmas Eve of 1895, the house was full of people. Nathaniel and Sarah were there with their 3 children, along with several of the cowhands who had nowhere else to go for the holiday, and a widow from town who Theresa had befriended through the fund. The children were running through the house in excitement, waiting for morning and the presents that would be under the tree. The adults gathered in the parlor, drinking hot cider and telling stories. Theresa stood in the doorway, looking at the scene before her. The tree glowed with candles, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the people she loved most in the world were gathered together, safe and warm and happy. She felt Owen come up behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. I am thinking about how different this is from that first Christmas I spent in Texas, she said. I was so alone then, so afraid. I never imagined I could have all this. You are not crying, are you? Owen asked, a smile in his voice. Theresa laughed and wiped at her eyes. Maybe a little. But they are happy tears, only happy tears now. Owen turned her to face him. Do you remember what I told you that day I found you in the boarding house, barely surviving? I said I thought joy lay ahead for you. I was right, was I not? You were, Theresa agreed. You dried my tears and promised me joy, and you have given me more than I ever dared hope for. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Owen corrected. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Before you came, this house was just a place I worked. You made it a home. You made me happy in a way I did not know I could be. Thomas called for them to come join the carol singing, and they went into the parlor hand in hand. As Theresa sang surrounded by her family, she thought about that frightened woman who had stepped off the stage coach so many years ago. She hoped that woman, if she could see this moment, would know it had all been worth it. Every tear, every moment of despair, every cold night wondering if she would survive. It had all led here to this perfect evening, to this life she had built with her own strength and Owen's love. The years continued to roll by, bringing with them the normal joys and sorrows of life. The children grew older and found their own paths. Thomas eventually took over much of the ranch operations, proving himself a capable manager. Emma married a lawyer from El Paso and moved there, though she visited often with her children. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Shafter and dedicating himself to educating the children of ranch families who might not otherwise have access to learning. The Montgomery Women's Fund helped dozens of women over the years. Some went on to marry and start families. Others found careers as teachers, seamstresses, shop owners. Theresa took a personal interest in each woman who came through, sharing her own story and offering encouragement. She knew what it was like to feel lost and hopeless, and she was determined that no woman in Shafter would have to cry through the winter alone the way she had. Owen and Theresa grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of hardships. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, harsh winters that took cattle, market downturns that worried them. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Owen never broke his promise. Whenever Theresa cried, which was rare these days, he was there to dry her tears and remind her that they would get through it together. In the spring of 1910, Theresa and Owen celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Thomas organized a huge party at the ranch, with people coming from all over the county to celebrate. Former residents of the Montgomery Women's Fund came to thank Theresa for her help. Families they had befriended over the years brought food and gifts. The celebration lasted all day and into the night, with music and dancing and endless stories about the couple who had become pillars of their community. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Theresa and Owen slipped away to their favorite spot by the creek. They sat on the same fallen log where Owen had proposed 27 years earlier, watching the water flow by. 25 years, Theresa said, shaking her head in wonder. It has gone so fast. And we have 25 more ahead of us at least, Owen said. Maybe more if we are lucky. Do you have any regrets? Theresa asked. Owen considered the question seriously before answering. Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, and you are the best thing in my life. Well, you and the children and the grandchildren and this land, but mostly you. Theresa leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think my life ended when I got on that stage coach to Texas. I thought I was running away from everything I knew to something unknown and frightening, but I was actually running toward this, toward you and this life we have built." "The funny thing about life," Owen said, "is that sometimes what seems like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be the best. If Walter Hughes had lived, you would have married him, and I never would have met you. I know it is selfish, but I cannot help being grateful for the circumstances that brought you to me." "It is not selfish," Theresa assured him. "I feel the same way. Everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. The pain, the fear, the crying through that long winter. It was all preparing me for this, for us." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to come out. From the house, they could hear music and laughter, the sounds of their family celebrating. Theresa thought about all the tears she had cried in her life. The tears of grief when her parents died. The tears of despair when Walter Hughes died and she found herself alone in a strange place. The tears of loneliness through that first bitter winter. The tears of confusion when she started to fall in love with Owen and did not know if he felt the same. And then later, the happy tears. The tears when each of her children was born. The tears when Nathaniel got married. The tears at Margaret's funeral, sad but grateful for the years they had shared. The tears of pride watching her children grow into good people. Every tear had been part of her journey, shaping her into the woman she had become. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked. "Tears," Theresa said. "All the tears I have cried over the years. You promised you would dry them and bring me joy. You kept your promise, Owen. You kept every promise you ever made to me." "And I always will," Owen said, kissing her temple. "For as long as I live, I will be here to dry your tears and make sure the happy moments outnumber the sad ones." "They already do," Theresa said softly. "They have for a long time now." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Theresa felt a profound sense of gratitude for her life. She had arrived in Texas with nothing, had cried all through that first terrible winter, convinced she would not survive. But she had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. She had built a life that was rich in love and purpose and meaning. She had raised children who would carry on her legacy of kindness and hard work. She had helped other women find their way through dark times. And she had loved and been loved by a man who saw her worth even when she could not see it herself. The party continued late into the night. Theresa danced with Owen, with her sons, with her grandsons. She hugged her daughters and daughters-in-law, admired her grandchildren, and thanked the friends who had become family over the years. And when she finally went to bed that night, exhausted and happy, she fell asleep without a single tear, just a smile on her face and Owen's arm around her. The following years brought more grandchildren, more celebrations, more quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the prairie. Theresa's hair turned silver, and Owen's dark hair became streaked with gray. They moved a little slower, but they were still active in the ranch and the community. The Montgomery Women's Fund continued to help women in need, now managed by Emma, who had moved back to Shafter after her husband passed away. Thomas and his wife lived in the main ranch house with their growing family, while Theresa and Owen had built a smaller house nearby where they could enjoy their retirement without being underfoot. In 1920, on a warm June evening, Owen died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 62. He had been in good health right up until the end, working with the cattle just the day before. Theresa woke to find him still beside her, a peaceful expression on his face, gone to whatever lay beyond. She cried then, hard and bitter tears for the loss of the man who had been her partner for 37 years. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful that they had been given so many years together. Grateful that he had not suffered. Grateful for every promise he had kept, every tear he had dried, every joy they had shared. At his funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives Owen had touched. His children and grandchildren spoke about his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family and land. Former cowhands talked about how he had treated them with respect and fairness. Town leaders praised his generosity and community involvement. And Theresa, standing at the front with her family, knew that Owen's legacy would live on in all the lives he had shaped. After the funeral, Theresa went back to the small house she and Owen had shared. She sat in his chair on the porch and let herself cry, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. But as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she felt a peace settle over her. Owen had lived a good life. They had loved each other well, and while she would miss him every day for the rest of her life, she would not dishonor his memory by giving up on the joy he had worked so hard to give her. She lived for another 15 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She continued to work with the Montgomery Women's Fund, sharing her story with women who needed to hear that survival was possible, that joy could come after sorrow. She taught her grandchildren to bake bread and tend gardens and treat everyone with kindness. She wrote down her memories in a journal, wanting future generations to know the story of the mail-order bride who cried all through the winter and the cowboy who dried her tears and promised joy ahead. On a spring morning in 1935, Theresa passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 73. She was buried beside Owen in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. At her funeral, 3 generations of Kellers gathered, along with dozens of women whose lives had been changed by her kindness and the fund she had established. They told stories about her strength, her compassion, her unshakable belief that joy could follow sorrow if you were brave enough to keep going. Her great-granddaughter, also named Theresa, found the journal her namesake had written. In it, she read the story of a young woman who had traveled west to marry a stranger and instead found herself widowed before she arrived. She read about the cold winter of crying, about the cowboy named Owen who had offered her work and hope. She read about the slow healing, the growing love, the life they had built together. And on the last page, written just weeks before Theresa's death, were these words: "If I could go back to that cold January day when I arrived in Shafter with nothing but grief and fear, I would tell that young woman not to despair. I would tell her that the tears are temporary, but the joy that comes after is real and lasting. I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows, that she will survive and thrive and build a life beyond her wildest dreams. I would tell her that a kind cowboy will dry her tears and keep his promise of joy ahead. And I would tell her that every moment of pain is worth it for the happiness that follows. Life is hard, but it is also beautiful. Love is real, joy is possible. And sometimes, the worst thing that can happen to you leads you exactly where you were always meant to be." Young Theresa closed the journal with tears in her eyes. She looked around at her family, at the ranch that had been built with love and determination, at the land her great-grandparents had worked to make productive and prosperous. She thought about the Women's Fund that still helped people in need, carrying on the legacy of compassion her great-grandmother had started. And she understood that the story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy was not just a story about 2 people who had loved each other. It was a story about hope, about resilience, about the power of kindness to transform lives. The Keller Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down from parents to children who had heard the story and understood what it meant. The Montgomery Women's Fund evolved with the times, helping women through the Great Depression, through wars, through changing social landscapes. And in the town of Shafter, Texas, the story of Theresa and Owen became a legend, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the heart of the story remained true. A woman had come west with nothing and found everything. She had cried all through a bitter winter, and a good man had dried her tears and promised that joy lay ahead. And together, they had built a life that proved that promises, when made with sincerity and kept with dedication, could change the world. The moral was simple but powerful. No matter how dark the winter, spring always comes. No matter how bitter the tears, joy can follow. And sometimes, when you think your life is ending, it is actually just beginning. All you need is the courage to keep going, the strength to accept help when it is offered, and the wisdom to recognize love when it appears in unexpected places. Theresa Montgomery Keller's life was a testament to that truth. She had arrived in Texas broken and alone, and she had left behind a legacy of love, strength, and compassion that would last for generations. The tears she cried through that first winter had watered the seeds of something beautiful, and the cowboy who dried those tears had helped her grow into the remarkable woman she became. Their story lived on, not just in the journal or in family memories, but in the very land they had worked together, in the lives they had touched, in the fund that continued to help women in need. It lived on in every person who heard it and found hope in their own dark times. It lived on in the belief that kindness matters, that love heals, that joy is always possible if you are brave enough to believe in it. And on warm spring evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and the sun set in a blaze of gold, some said you could still feel their presence on the land they had loved. The mail-order bride who had cried all through winter and the cowboy who had dried her tears and promised joy ahead, together forever in the place they had made their home. Their story was complete, their promises kept, their love eternal. It was a story of hardship overcome, of love found in unexpected places, of joy earned through tears and determination. It was, in the end, a story of hope, and that was the greatest legacy they could have left behind.